Hi, the purpose of this screencast is to discuss with you all about small groups. We're going to talk today about when should you do a small group, how often, and what content is best to use for your small group. The first thing you need to make sure you have set before small group instruction can be successful and effective in your classroom is to ensure that you have a proper and appropriate layout of your classroom. First off, you want to make sure that you have your small group table positioned in such a way that you can still monitor the progress of the rest of your students while you are in that small group instruction. Some teachers like to have their small group table in the corner of a classroom so then they can easily monitor all of the other students at the same time. Some teachers even like to put their small group table right in the middle or center of the classroom in order to get that 360-degree view. Feel free to experiment with your position in order to get the best results, but the main point is make sure you can still see your students and especially can still see their computer screens while you're in your small group. Next, you want to make sure that you set expectations for your students while you're in small group. This includes the kids that are in your small group and those who are not, those who are still just working on their learning path online or perhaps doing some offline activities. So first of all, when you're engaged in your small group, the rest of your class needs to understand that that time is sacred. They should still be using the GPS board, but this may be a time where they need to ask a peer, an expert, or perhaps even work on their peer conferencing sheet or pre-conference template while they're waiting for you to be done with your small group instruction. They should not feel that they need to interrupt your small group or walk around the room or be off task. You want to make sure that you set these expectations very clearly for when you are teaching a small group. Always remind them that when they're in a small group, they're going to want your undivided attention as well. We also find that it's very helpful to set norms for your small group. Might be even helpful to have those norms or rules posted right by where you have your small group instruction and refer to them frequently, especially in the first few weeks of school. Lastly, in order to have a successful and effective small group atmosphere in your classroom, it's very important that all students are engaged. Let's again start with those students who are not in your small group. They will be more apt to stay on task, use the GPS board, and wait patiently for you if they have several engaging activities ready and waiting for them, whether it's on their playlist or whether there's some activities that you have offline for them. That will be very important in the management of your classroom. Same with those kids in your small group. Now we know there's magic in a small group and the students in a sense are a captive audience already, but you're still going to want to make sure that you're engaging them at all times, whether you're using dry erase boards to get their attention, perhaps showing them a PowerPoint or using your smartboard or other tech devices with just those 2 to 6 kids in your small group. Keep the engagement high. So when should you actually instruct a small group? Well, ideally, you would be in small group instruction every day of the week. Not all day, not the entire period, but definitely for some amount of time each day. Here's one example of a potential schedule. Notice that there's really 2 different types of small group that take place throughout the week. One is your current content group. This is when you're really going to focus on the targets, the units, the standards that your students are actually working on in their playlist, which, as you can see based on this example, really should be the majority of the small group instruction. But you also want to make sure you get your performance series or NWEA gap filling in there as well by using your data from those systems. Here's an example. I know we've talked before about a throwback Thursday, for example, where everybody on the team on Thursday is using performance series or NWEA to gap fill with students. These are the groups that tend to be the most fluid because you're going by strand or perhaps by individual standard on performance series or NWEA, and those are always going to have all different kinds of students in each of those circumstances. Your current content, depending on how you structure it, those may stay a little bit static from time to time, and we'll talk in a minute about a little bit more about current content. Another example is this particular calendar or schedule where you can see we've got the gap filling in there twice. It really just depends on the logistics of your classroom. Ideally, you want to make sure at least once a week every child gets some type of gap filling from one of the assessment systems. If you're able to make that all happen on a Thursday or a Friday or whatever day you choose, then great. But if you don't think that's going to happen, that you're going to be able to see all of your students on one particular day for performance series or NWEA, just split it up into 2 days. Perhaps Tuesday, Thursday, Monday, Friday, whatever works best for you and your students. This is just another example. So how often should you small group? As we said, small group should really be pulled every day. And ideally, every child would be seen at least 2 times per week in your small group. That would really be once for the gap filling and once for the current content. And again, that's really just the minimum. Small groups typically are about 10 to 15 minutes in length. Again, this is a lot like the mini lesson or lesson of old, where we often put our blood, sweat, and tears into making an amazing lesson. But now we want to go ahead and put this in a small group so we have that magic and that captive audience. But still, think about getting their attention somehow, having that hook, and then going on and getting that practice done right with those 2 to 6 kids. And this part's quite important too. Your small group should really only take, at the most, half of your period or block. And that's very important because the rest of your students still need to be attended to as well. You need to make sure that you have time in your period or block to facilitate that GPS board. You're going to have students who are on the help or on conference or need some assistance with their test or assessment. So it's very important that students are not having to wait till the next day or 2 days later for their needs to be addressed on the GPS board. So again, try to keep your small groups to only perhaps at the most half of your period or block. So with current content, let's kind of dive just briefly into current content and gap filling, what that might look like. So with current content groups, again, this is the majority of what you will be using to inform your small group instructions and to build your small groups. Lots of different ways to do this. You may want to pull your current content group by standard. Maybe you've got 4 kids who are all on one particular standard, and you could tell that by what target trackers you're using or by your wall trackers. Perhaps you want to pull those kids together. Another way to do it, which even can be quite logistical, is by unit. Whether this is your math class, your science class, your ELA class, perhaps grabbing kids who are all on a similar unit at the same time. That's often very easy to kind of keep that in your head, to keep that tracked as students move through units. You could also even pull students by level. This would work best if you have several levels in your class and perhaps only have 2 to 6 kids per level. You could do this. If you have a large group of, say, kids on Spark Point 4, that's going to be a little bit more difficult unless you divide them up. It's also likely that if you have, if you pull by level or Spark Point, they may be in various places within that Spark Point. They could be on different standards. But we've seen this work successfully as well, But my recommendation to you would be to try to group based on that standard or by the unit. That way you're going to really pinpoint and be very, very accurate into the needs of those students. So performance series or NWEA gap filling, which again would take up 1 to 2 days of your small group instruction per week. I would ask you to refer to the screencast that we recorded as part of the Matchbook Teacher course. Remember, you can refer back to that course at any time. If you go to the target on small grouping, you will find that screencast there, and it will walk you through the process, how to access your classroom tab on performance series, and how to go and look at each individual standard and in order to pull a very strategic small group and to work on just one weakness or one standard at a time in order to achieve maximum results. And don't forget, you can use that Skills Connect in Performance Series, which has all those great questions already done for you by standard. Depending on which way you choose to use your Performance Series data or your NWEA data, we still recommend tracking what you are doing in your small groups. This would be for both current content and for gap filling, but this might be one type of worksheet that you keep. You're able to put your objective or standard, which students you pulled for that particular objective or standard, and then perhaps some notes. This is just one example of how to track your small groups. Again, this resource you can find in your MBL teacher course as well. Feel free to use something that you create. One way that we've seen be very, very successful is just even keeping a calendar every day, putting down what students you meet with in what standard, objective, unit that you're covering with them. But either way, you want to make sure that you are seeing students ideally, again, twice a week, once for that gap filling and at least once for current content. In some smaller classes, you're going to find that you may be able to see students 3 times, perhaps 2 times for current content and 1 time for performance series or NWEA gap filling. Okay, I hope this was helpful in trying to figure out how to be as effective as you can be with your small group instruction based on how your classroom could be laid out, how often to small group, and perhaps even which days you want to do what type of content. Remember, this is always available to you, so refer back to it as often as needed. Bye-bye.